Right. Jean, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for talking to us today, because I know that this is, as you just said to me, this has been the biggest trauma of your life, and it can't be an easy thing to discuss, but I think it's really important that you do, so thank you. And I wonder if we go back to the start, really, and can you tell me about when you became pregnant, and what your hopes and expectations were?
When I became pregnant, as in the actual months, etc., no. I was told when I was 18 that I wouldn't be able to get pregnant without medical intervention because I had problems with menstruation all through my teens. So I never expected that I would be able to get pregnant until I was ready to have children. But obviously because of STDs, etc., I was always careful as you can be. So I was at a regular gynecological appointment in 2002. Had to have one every year just to get everything checked out, make sure I was okay, didn't have any cancer, etc. And there was a problem. And the doctor asked me if there was a possibility I could be pregnant. And I kind of laughed at him and said, don't be stupid, you read my notes, you know it's not possible without medical intervention. And he said, no, there's definitely something wrong, can I do an internal? I was like, yeah, okay. Did an internal, and he said, you're absolutely sure? I went, read my notes. I was told in this hospital that it's not possible. So they did a blood test, they did a urine test, and they booked me in for an emergency ultrasound 48 hours later, and I was 16 weeks and 1 day pregnant. So after I picked myself up off the floor and looked at the photo, the ultrasound scan of the baby several times and made sure that it was actually a baby, I was like, I'm not supposed to get pregnant. I'm 22 years old, I've got mental health problems, I've got no stable romantic partnership relationship because Ty's father and I have broken up. I have a complicated relationship with my own family. How the hell am I going to look after a baby? What am I going to do? I went and spoke to my psychiatrist, spoke to my parents, spoke to social services, and social services and the psychiatrist said, right, well, you're going to have an abortion then, aren't you? I said, no. Then what do you mean you're not going to have an abortion? You've just admitted that you don't know how you're going to look after this baby. I went, I know 3 things in the world. I know I don't know how I'm going to look after this baby. I know I'm not going to have an abortion, and I know that I'm having a baby. And that is all I know at the moment. I don't believe in abortion. There is no way on the planet you're going to make me have an abortion. And for the next 4 months, until Ty was delivered at 38 weeks, every appointment that I went to, the first thing that was put on the table was the abortion paperwork. All I had to do is sign it and I could go and have an abortion at any point on medical grounds up until the moment that I went into labour and it was too late anymore. So even before she was born, I knew it was going to be a fight to be able to have this baby, but I also knew that I was having a baby and there was nothing else in the world that was clear to me. I had no idea how I was going to do it, how I was going to look after a baby, what help or support that they were going to give me. I knew that by law they were supposed to give me help and support because you saw things on the news all the time about social services supposedly helping people. But yeah, it's been a fight since day one.
I can feel your determination. How did you feel as a mother when she was born?
For the first 10 weeks I didn't. I was kind of still in shock, still fighting social services to try and be able to look after her, get the right help and support I needed, which wasn't being given, trying to prove that I could do this when everybody was telling me that I couldn't. But then when she was 10 weeks old, she got septicemia, and I was told, when I got her to the hospital, I was told that she might die, and that was kind of the slap in the face. I was so scared that she was going to die and that I was going to lose her, that actually made me realise that I did actually feel something for this baby, because it wasn't a case of fighting against somebody else. This was something that I couldn't actually fight against. That if it happened, there was nothing that I could do or could have done differently or could have done better. And that was the scariest time until the adoption.
And she got better from that,
Yes.
obviously. Can you talk me through, were social services kind of intervening on a very regular basis at that point? What was the kind of interaction between you?
All through the pregnancy I was having appointments where they wanted me to go into once they'd realised that I wasn't going to have an abortion, that wasn't going to happen, they were trying to get me to agree to go into a mother and baby assessment centre and have an assessment to see whether I was capable of being a parent. And I was saying, but the baby's not even here yet, you haven't given me any support, how can you assess whether I'm capable of being a parent before actually giving me the help I need, finding out what help I need to be able to be a parent? And my mother said that we could go and stay with her and that she would help me look after the baby. And so that was agreed because I had to spend a week in hospital after I gave birth, and the hospital said that they had no concerns with my parenting at that point and they wouldn't support an assessment for me, paperwork for me to go into a mother and baby assessment. So it was agreed that I would go and stay with my mother and stepfather. But social services were very obviously looking for a reason to be able to take her, because they were constantly coming round still wanting to know what was going on.
And were there concerns about your physical disability or your mental health or a combination?
My physical disability was completely ignored. The entire focus was on my mental health and my ability to be able to look after her because of my mental health. When she was 10 weeks old and she almost died, again they tried to stop her from being sent home from the hospital because I had a nightmare while I was asleep with her in my arms where I thought that I might have bitten her, because the last thing I remembered was biting my assailant in the nightmare, and then I woke up with the baby crying. The nurses took her away and checked her over and said there was nothing wrong with her, but because I was upset they said that they would keep her overnight while I slept. I informed social services because I was worried that if I didn't tell them and they found out from somebody else, they would use that against me. As it is, they used it against me anyway. And then from then on, it was supposed to be for a 7-day respite, and then she would come home, and then 7 days became 14 days, and then 14 days became 16 years, 18 years if you include the 2 years that I was fighting in family courts to keep her before the adoption was finalised.
Can you remember, do you feel comfortable talking about the last time you saw her and when she was taken?
The last time I saw her was June 2005. I got to the contact centre an hour before the session was due and I was absolutely inconsolable. One of the contact workers actually sat with me and was piling me with coffee and tissues and trying to get me to calm down so that we could have the session, because I wasn't allowed to show any emotion during the session. So I pulled myself together.
You weren't allowed to, in that you thought it might work against you?
No, you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to do anything that might distress the child. You have to be happy and not let the child know that this is the last time you're ever going to see them. So cleaned myself up, refreshed my makeup, piled on the lippy, did my best to plant a smile on and not let my 2-year-old know that this was the last time I was ever going to see them. And we went to the park and we had a lovely time, and as soon as the foster carer came and took her away, I broke down again, and it was about an hour and a half before they could send me home. I went straight to the pub and got absolutely paralytic, and pretty much for the next 6 years that's how I coped. It was only when I met my current partner in 2008, and through probably the next 4 years, 4.5 years of being with him and having medications changed and reactions with medications that meant that I can't drink, that I actually sobered up. I don't think that if it didn't become a situation where I physically couldn't drink because my medication wouldn't let me, I don't think I would be sober now.
I mean, that's an indication of the depth of the trauma, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I was always sober when I was with Ty. Whenever I was in mother and baby units and there was the chance to actually be a parent, I was always sober then. And then as soon as she was taken away from me again, drinking, I did drugs for a while, anything that I could get my hands on to kind of numb the pain, I would do. I'm not proud of the person I was then. I'm very proud of what I've done to pull myself away from that. But it's what I needed to do at the time to cope. I didn't have a good enough support network around me to not do that.
Were you offered help?
No. Even when my physical health started becoming really bad and I was constantly complaining that I was too tired, I was in too much pain, I was having to use crutches, I was always told that I was lazy, I wasn't trying hard enough, you can't use crutches and run around after a toddler, you've got to make a choice. Everything that was physically wrong with me was being ignored, or I was being told it was my own fault, or it was being put down to my mental health, and if I just tried harder, if I just wanted it more. There was never a time when they said, okay, well, look, here, let's give you a carer, let's have somebody look after you and see if you can look after the baby. But in the times when that sort of happened organically by accident, I was doing okay, and those people around me said I was doing okay. So from 12 weeks old until 6 months old, when we went into the first mother and baby unit, Ty was with a fantastic carer, and I would spend 10 plus hours a day in the carer's house, and the carer looked after me and I looked after Ty. So when Ty was asleep, I slept. I was expected to do the bottles, the bathing, the nappy changing. When Ty started weaning, the foster carer taught me how to do the food for the weaning, etc. But when Ty was asleep, if I needed to, she let me crawl in her bed and sleep. And she would wake me up every so often and say, drink, or I've made you a sandwich. But if I needed to sleep, I slept. And Ty was thriving, and the midwife was happy with her progress, the health visitor was happy with her progress.
What do you remember of your time as a mum? As a hands-on mum then to Ty?
As she was getting older and I was getting more comfortable and I was getting the support I needed, I loved being with her. It was what I was supposed to be. I was supposed to be her mum. I was looking after her. I was with somebody who was supporting me, who was helping me, who was praising me when I was doing things right, who didn't berate me if I did anything wrong, who would sit down and discuss things with me so that we made a plan together for what would happen. And I would have been quite happy if I had stayed with that foster carer forever and stay in that situation forever, because I felt that was working well. It was.
And you had the chance at that time to do the normal things, I suppose, do the weaning and
go to the park, go swimming, have Ty christened, do all the things that a normal mum does. And even when the placements broke down and we were going to the contact centre for the 18 months that we went to the contact centre, and I was only allowed to see her 3 times a week for an hour and a half a week. In that contact centre, with that same set of staff all the time, who again were supportive, who were helpful, who were encouraging, I was coping. The contact reports proved that I was coping. The staff from the contact centre wanted to come to court and give evidence on my behalf to say that I was coping, and that if the kind of service that they would offer me was put in place, it would be okay. But because they were being paid by social services, they weren't allowed to. And if you see something written on a piece of paper, it can be interpreted multiple different ways. And so the contact reports were twisted. For every sentence I found that proved that something was going well, social services could find something that proved something wasn't quite well. Or it had been written in a way that kind of explained that it was against one person and not another. So
Did you
baby
feel
cried
that?
at the beginning of contact. Was that because she was hungry? Was that because she was tired? Was that because she'd just woken up and she wasn't in the same place that she'd fallen asleep? Social services said it was because she was with me, but they ignored the bit where it said baby cried at the end of contact, when she was leaving me and going somewhere else.
Did you feel they'd made their mind up?
Yes, very definitely. They knew what they wanted from the minute they found out I was pregnant and that I was vulnerable, and at no point could I ever change their mind. At one point, there was a lady called, I think it was Alison Lampard. She was very famous around that time. She had a statue in Trafalgar Square. She was a thalidomide baby, so she had no arms and no legs. And they were doing lots of TV programmes about the fact that she was pregnant, and she was given 3 carers, so she had 24-hour support 27 days a week. And I said to the social worker, why can't I have that? And she went, well, you're not disabled, are you? And I said, how can you say I'm not disabled? By every definition in law. And she said, yeah, but you're not in a wheelchair. So how do you fight against attitudes like that?
You did carry on fighting though, didn't you?
I did. I lost
Sum up
Ty.
what your fight has been.
Sorry, I lost Ty in 2005. She was adopted. Sorry, they were adopted. In 2007, I did become wheelchair bound, and in 2008, I actually received a definitive diagnosis that my condition was genetic, progressive, and degenerative. And the things that were used to diagnose me were all the things that I'd been complaining about all the way through the adoption. So I went back to the solicitors that had supported me during the adoption, and I said, look, is there anything we can do with this? Is there an appeal or anything we can do? And they said, potentially, but the first problem we've got is that you're only allowed 12 months in which to issue an appeal. And so I was out of time. So we went through all the court documents. I made a definitive list of every time I mentioned a symptom that was used in my diagnosis anywhere in all the court documents. And we ended up with a 35-page document which we submitted to the appeals division, and they said that the first thing we would have to do is go through the local authorities complaints process before they could look at an appeal. But yes, potentially they would look at an appeal, although the adoption could not be overturned and the contact arrangement could not be looked at, and I could not be asking for any compensation, or they would refuse to accept the appeal. So we started the appeals process, and that took 2.5 years. That finished in 2010. We ended up having to go to a tribunal, which was a magistrate, a social worker and a layperson, and I actually won on the fact that if my physical disability had been acknowledged, assessed and supported, it may have been possible for me to have retained custody and been able to parent, but that's an unknown because it was never looked at.
How does that make you feel?
There are no words to describe that. That's one of the reasons why I am still so angry and still fight, and although I had to be careful until Ty and I regained contact, because I could have lost the contact that I did have, I still spoke out and I still did what I could to try and support other people and to let people know that forced adoption does still happen. And no matter what people try to call it these days, if you as a parent do not say, yes, I agree to this adoption, yes, here, have my baby, if they are taken away from you, then that is a forced adoption. There's only 2 ways to adopt a child, either because the child is willingly given away or because they are forced away from you. And there is no way that I willingly gave her away, even when I was willing to concede that an adoption was going to happen and there was nothing I could do about it. I then said, okay, so how do I make this adoption as safe as possible for her? Because I'd begun to realise that there were problems within my family. I was being told that part of the reason that my mental health was as bad as it was because of the way that I was raised in the family that I was raised in. And so there was no way that I wanted my child to be left within that family for that cycle to continue. So I was saying, okay, but if the adoption has got to happen, then it has to be X, Y and Z, but I still want to be the parent. I still want to be the parent as the first objective. I refuse to sign any paperwork. There is never a signature anywhere on the planet where anyone can say that I agreed to have the adoption, because I never agreed. And so it was, my parental responsibility was removed from me by the court. I was never actually told when the adoption went ahead. I've got an idea because of timescales, but I was never informed that a family had been put forward to adopt or when the adoption was going to go ahead. I was never invited to court to be able to try and contest the adoption, because as far as the court and the law was concerned, I wasn't the parent. Social services were. My parental rights had already been removed.
Can we move forward quite a long time, I suppose, to where Ty, Mario now, would you like us
yeah.
to refer?
Ty is
Yeah.
more of a nickname.
Yeah. You have, in the last year, is it, managed to...
14 months.
In the last 14 months managed to get back in contact, and that's... You had wanted to remain in contact during her childhood, had you, Jean?
I had wanted to remain in contact. The adoptive family that Ty was placed with didn't want contact, and so we had to go to court and have a 3-day court hearing about what kind of contact I was going to be allowed. And I was allowed something called letterbox twice a year. And I kept that up for the whole of Mario's lifetime until she turned 18. So my last official contact was her 18th birthday, their 18th birthday. And then when they turned 18, I had to write to social services and formally ask if contact would be allowed to be continued.
So you were allowed to write a letter twice a year, is that right?
Yes.
That's the letterbox?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And send photographs.
Yeah.
And send a birthday card and a Christmas card.
Yeah.
And presents.
Yeah.
I was supposed to be allowed to send videos as well, but the adoptive family said that they would refuse to accept them. And in return, twice a year, I received a letter. Once a year, I received photographs, and when she was old enough, I received school reports. And I also received the reports from stage school, because she went to stage school from 5 to 18, so I got those as well. Then when in April, with the 18th birthday, I wrote to social services and formally requested the request to have contact continue post 18 in a format that Ty chose, and I was told that that had been rejected. And so my next opportunity would have been when Ty turned 25. I could then write to social services and ask them to put the request in again. Apart from that, it would just be sitting and waiting.
I think for anyone it's impossible to imagine unless you've been through this, and thankfully not that many people do, but I think for anyone listening, can you try and describe what it's like knowing that your child is being brought up by someone else, even though you so desperately wanted to be involved?
Do you remember the 2003 bombings? 2005 bombings in London. First thing I did was ring the social worker and ask them to ring the adoptive family to find out where my child was, to make sure that my child wasn't dead. The bombing at the Ariana Grande concert, the first thing I did was ring the social worker and ask them where my child was to make sure that my child wasn't one of the dead. Every time I heard that a child had been died or was in an accident, on the news, I scoured the newspaper reports and I prayed that it wasn't my child, and God forbid me, I was happy when I saw a photo of the child and it wasn't mine. Happy that somebody else's child has died. How could anybody feel that? But at least I knew that they were out there somewhere alive and that I may get to see them again. I lived for those letters that came through every 6 months that told me that they were alive and they were happy and they were doing well, because that was all I had. When a child is dead, you have certainty, you have a grave or you have the ashes. Somehow you know you have to pick yourself up and move on with your life, but you know where your child is, you know that they are safe. When your child is adopted, you never know that. I was a walking organ bank. The only time that I would know that she was sick is if she needed an organ donation, because I would be the first person they would turn to find out if there was a genetic match. But I wasn't told when she fell down and broke her arm. I wasn't told when she needed surgery to cauterise her nose because she was having nasal issues.
Broke my arm?
I wasn't told when, I wasn't told anything about those steps. I asked at one point before the adoption if I would be told if she died, if I would be allowed to go to the funeral, and I was told no, because I wasn't a relative. That was for relatives.
And how much did you think about them?
Every second of every day. First thing you think of when you wake up in the morning, last thing you think of when you go to bed at night. You're always wondering, what do you say, and trying to gauge the person if they ask you if you've got children. Because the next question is, where are they? And is it going to be a person who's going to be understanding? Is it going to be a person who thinks that children only get taken away if you've been abusing them? Or are they going to be somebody who's going to be telling you, which I've had several times in my life, eventually I'll just get over it, I'm sick of hearing you talking about this, why can't you just move on? So your whole life, everyone you meet, you're always trying to gauge, what kind of person is this, what's the answer, what do I give? There are people out there who've gone on and had more children. I haven't even had another pregnancy. Ty was my only pregnancy, my only child.
Is that in part because you were fearful?
In part because I was fearful of falling pregnant again, so I've always used more than one form of birth control. In part because of the medical problems that I had before I was pregnant, they were still, have always been there, are still there now. In part because I could, knowing how sick, how bad and how difficult it was for me going through the adoption, I could never put another partner through that. There were couples in one of the mother and baby centres that I was in, and the father was told that if they wanted to keep the child, they had to leave the mother because the mother wasn't doing well in the assessment process, but the father was. So they had to choose between the baby and their wife, or the mother was told that they had to choose between their husband and their wife, and I didn't ever want to put a partner in that situation.
Let's move forward a bit. I mean, what's it been like getting to know Ty now? That first time that you saw them?
We'd been talking online for about a year first, just to make sure that we were reasonably comfortable with each other, and because we're both sick, we have to manage our health conditions, etc. as well. But it was scary. It was brilliant. This is only our second actual face-to-face meeting, so it's kind of surreal. But I think we can both agree it's difficult in parts because Ty is a person, and the child that I was told was growing up in the letterbox contact that I received from the adoptive family are not the same person. So we're trying to get to know each other and navigating all the issues around why was the adoption, how was the adoption, health issues, and what has been inherited from me. So it's a journey. It's one that I'm very glad, I'm very happy and very pleased that's happening, but also I'm very scared that I'm going to say or do something that upsets Ty and they go running for the hills again and think, actually no, maybe my adoptive parents were right and I should stay away from this person, or actually this is a little bit too intense and too full on and I'm not ready for this yet. So yeah, I had a baby who was first taken away from me, a toddler the last time we saw each other and I had any regular physical contact with them, and now I've got a almost 20-year-old and very little contact in between. So genetically I'm her mother, I still feel like her mother, but it's difficult and it's scary, and it would be a lie to say anything else.
And we saw you have a hug earlier.
Yes.
And how did that feel?
Amazing. That was only the second hug we've ever had, but the first one, because at our first meeting we didn't really have a hug until we were saying goodbye in the station, and then it was a really quick, rushed, fleeting one. I was too scared to ask for one in case Ty wasn't ready to hug yet, and you probably felt the same, didn't you?
Yeah.
So I've spent a long time watching Long Lost Family, and unfortunately things don't actually work the way that they say they do in real life. So that first meeting, you don't just run up to each other and hug them and everything's hunky-dory the way they portray it. I think they need to portray a lot more about the real aspects and the difficulties and things like that, because it's not all flowers and roses and everything is great from the moment you first start talking to each other. And our first contact, we spent about 5 hours just trying to make sure that we were actually the people that we were supposed to be, asking each other questions that only the other would know the answer to try and make sure that it wasn't a scam or somebody trying to pretend to be.
I'm your long lost.
Your recollections of that sense of not quite trusting the whole situation and everything that's gone before.
I was told, or I always knew that Ty knew that she was adopted because another child had been adopted into the same family afterwards, and so Ty had to be informed because they were interviewed as part of that adoption process, but I had no idea what they'd been told about why they were adopted, because all the focus had been on my mental health issues. Did they think that I was just totally incapable of looking after them and mad as a hatter, and they were wanting to tell me that they were so grateful that I'd never been adopted and that they never wanted to have contact with me again, and it just coming from them rather than coming through social services. As it turned out, those first few conversations were all around medical issues, even though I'd always sent medical information over when anything had happened to me. You'd always been grown up being told that there were no medical issues, that your family didn't have any information about medical issues from me or my family, which was totally wrong.
Yeah.
So Ty, were you kind of concentrating on practical things first of all in a way, and then I don't know, how do you decide, how do you approach something like this? There's so much to unpack.
I had no idea. I'd grown up, being told I was adopted. I had always been told that you weren't capable of looking after me, and that you just wouldn't have been a good parent, that you gave me up willingly because of it. I was not told that you had genuinely put up such a struggle to be able to keep me. I was told every now and then, the whole adoptive parent spiel of, you can never go out in this or that or the other, you can never go on TV or this or that. But Mum would, come and try and take me away and things like that. Ridiculous.
Yeah. How do you feel now? I mean, you found each other.
Yeah.
But as Jean was saying, this isn't a kind of, you're not just going to waltz off into the sunset and everything be fine. Do you? How do you assess it all and come to terms with it?
A lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of trust that needs to be built. This is my mum. 100%, she has always been my mum. But at the same time, I don't really know much about you.
Yeah, I'd always hoped that contact would be agreed, and that as 18 was approaching, that I would receive some support, and there would be support around the idea of contact with continuing, face-to-face contact possibly being, and there would be some training, etc. in that, and there was nothing. Maybe if Ty had felt that she was they were in a place where they could say yes, that they wanted contact to continue on their 18th birthday, that might have happened, but because they were made to feel like they had to say no, and then we're kind of doing this on our own, we get nothing, we're kind of left to figure it out on our own. So again, that support that you hear about on Long Lost Family, where they say that we talk to people off camera, we have discussions with psychotherapists, etc. None of that has happened with us. None of that hand-holding through the difficult discussions is happening, so sometimes it's really hard to judge when the right question is. The first question Ty asked me after the yes, you are who I think you are there any heart problems in our family? So that was like, oh, okay, so there is something medically wrong with you, because I was always told no. And one of my greatest fears was that because my condition has a 50% inheritance rate, that it had been inherited. And I kind of always consoled myself with, well, at least that's one good thing, you know, they are healthy. So to find out that there are health problems has been quite upsetting, but we're navigating that as best we can, finding out what we have in common, what we don't, trying to give information about what doctors I've seen over the years and which hospitals are the best to go to for diagnosis and that kind of thing. And trying to work out what is appropriate to say about what happened and when and who was involved and how, and especially people that were involved in a negative way. Trying to work out the best things to say about my feelings about the adoptive parents.
Do you talk about your feelings?
Finding out that the adoption wasn't all rainbows and picnics and unicorns, and it wasn't this fantastic fairy tale that I'd been told it would be before it happened, or that it was through the letterbox contact.
This is to both of you, I mean, take it in turns. Do you feel angry?
Every day.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Time was stolen from us, and we're being punished for something that was neither of our fault. And we now have a lot of work to try and do to unpack it, to try and get to that normal parent-child relationship. And I don't know if we ever will get to the same kind of relationship that you guys had with your parents. That's the dream, that's the hope. But at least we have each other and we're trying to do it together, and whatever we have now is better than what we had 3, 4, 5 years ago. But those 18 years that were stolen from us are always going to be missing. There's nothing that we can ever do. And there's no way that I'm ever going to get my 12-week-old baby back, or my 2-year-old toddler back, and even if I was given my 2-year-old toddler back, there's still those 2 years, and who knows what damage was done during those 2 years.
Ty, do you want to add anything?
It can't be taken back. And from the perspective of the child, that was my entire life. I'm 19 now. That was a good 18 years. That's my whole existence. I can't get that back. And God knows what my mum had to go through. I'm glad I wasn't on her end of it. But I could have had her growing up. I could have had someone that fought for me relentlessly. And I didn't get that. And I should have. It's infuriating.
Thank you both for your honesty and for being so open. I think it's really, really powerful.
With veterans, specifically, a common sign of PTSD that you see in veterans is something called the 1,000-yard stare. It's a sign of dissociation. You know, they're awake, they're conscious, but their brain just isn't really there. You also see that a lot in adoption, and I did bring some photos of myself from when I was a very small child, some photos of me as a happy little baby, you know, when I was still with my mum. And then right after I got separated from her, there are these photos of me with that exact look. It's not a massive age difference in the photos either. It's not like showing a picture of a child and then, you know, a bit of a grumpy teenager. My face barely changed in them. I'm still so tiny, and the difference.
This one you're about 4 or 5 months old, and this one you've just turned a year, because those toys were bought for you for your first birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Tessa's covered a lot of ground, and I know obviously when we spoke, you were telling me, you know, you've met each other twice. Do you think maybe moving forward you'll try and see each other more?
Hopefully, yeah. The hardest thing to navigate is the distance that we live apart. And you would think that 30 miles in London isn't that much with the tube network, etc. But with me being in a wheelchair and with Ty having mobility issues, it's actually quite a way. For me to get over to Ty, it would be 3 trains and 2 buses and nearly 3 hours travel for Ty to get over to me. Depending on whether or not you can climb stairs on any given day, it could get down to like an hour and a half, but then it's the physical exhaustion of doing that as well as the actual time, the journey time. Ty's waiting for an autism diagnosis, so you've got to think about the noise of the tube and the traffic and rush hour, etc. I don't handle cold very well, so I really struggle to go out. I'm not allowed to go out when it's wet, in case I fall over and damage any of my bones, my internal organs. I've got an electric wheelchair as well as this, but then you're limited on where you can go with an electric wheelchair because it's a lot bigger and heavier. With this I need to be pushed. So I'm really lucky that you were able to provide taxis door to door today, otherwise I would have had to have had somebody come with me to bring
to be in any pain.
And it's a 2-hour journey just to get here, and 2 buses and 2 trains. So it's really difficult moving around London if you've got a disability, and I only have a 4-hour sitting tolerance before I have to go and lie down. So that makes things more complicated. When, apart from doing this today, I spent the whole of this week lying in bed. That's where I spend 95% of my time. I've got an electric bed, so I can change my position by remote control as and when I need to. I literally only leave bed if I've got a reason to get out of bed, something to go and do, because that's where I'm comfiest, that's where I'm safest.
You must tell us if you start to feel uncomfortable at any point, or, you know, we'll work to you, Jean. How old were you when you found out about the condition? How old were you when you got the diagnosis?
I was 28 when I was diagnosed. I've been symptomatic all my life, but my symptoms progressed. I was 13 when I had the first major symptom. And then it was a case of trying to prove that it wasn't mental health, because at the time I was having a lot of mental health problems, and at the time I was having mental health problems that even I can recognise. But they were saying that all the fatigue and everything was down to the mental health, not down to any physical health. I was being given physiotherapy for the back problems and being told that that was just growing pains, and my brain's gone again. What do they call it when you start? Oh, puberty. It was growing pains in puberty that was causing that, and that I would grow out of it, and I never did.
So Ty, have you got an official diagnosis, or you're waiting on an official diagnosis?
Yeah,
But do you think from the symptoms that you're experiencing and through Mum's experience that you think that you might have the same?
I'm absolutely certain that I do. I'm at the point where I'm practically needing a wheelchair. I already walk with a walking stick, and even that doesn't really help anymore. We have similar, like the same symptoms, among other things. So it's blatantly obvious that, you know, it passed on, but it's just a case of waiting for the official diagnosis.
And the hardest thing is that if Ty had had all the information that she needed medically earlier, and the doctors had been proactively managing, then they wouldn't be as sick as they are now. Because it's degenerative, just because it's not been to have to properly, so you can slow down the degeneration. You can never stop it, but you can slow it down. So if I'd have known when I was younger, I wouldn't be as ill as I am now. If Ty had known when they were younger, they wouldn't be as ill as they are now.
And I guess if Ty had you around and you could have had that additional support, someone that
Yeah.
understood the condition, you might have recognised that so much
Yeah.
sooner.
Yeah.
My fiance has the same condition as well. So does his family. They recognised it in me before I did, and then finding my mum on Facebook and seeing that she has the same diagnosis was just kind of the cherry on top. It's like, oh, how was this not noticed?
Must provide
Well,
some comfort, someone
It's
that
not
does
that it wasn't
understand.
noticed, it's that it was willfully
Yeah.
ignored.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, had
Yeah.
they known that Mum had the same thing, they might have recognised it sooner. I mean, now that you are
Well,
able
No, they
did
didn't
know.
I sent them all the medical information. When I was diagnosed in 2008, I sent them a liver arch vial full of all the medical information that
oh
was
no,
used for
sorry,
my diagnosis.
I knew that they knew, it's just they didn't pass that on.
Yeah.
That's why
That's
I
what I
said
meant.
it was willfully ignored. It wasn't known by the doctors, but it was known by the adoptive parents. It was willfully ignored by them, which is absolutely disgusting because, in a sense, they deliberately made Ty sick.